We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Hey guys! This is Uruzi and I'm back with part 5 of What If Naruto Was a Simple Teenage Shop Owner. Things aren't always as simple as they seem. Just because he found himself in a new world, Naruto shouldn't have forgotten this. Now he must deal with fallen angels, devils, perverts and God, all while maintaining a relationship and running his store. Things can never be simple for him. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 19. The light filtered through the main window of the living room. The soft sound of birds' lively chirping could be heard from within the confines of the room. Laid on top of the singular coach was one of the last remaining Nekashus within existence. Her expression was one of serenity as the early morning sun shone onto her blanket-covered form. The soft chirps of the birds made her second set of ears twitch slightly as she slept. The girl managed to keep her calm aura and appearance for several minutes before the chirping of the birds became too much for her unconscious mind to ignore. With slight twitch and a loud groan, Kuroka returned to the land of consciousness. The Nekashu slowly shrugged off the blankets covering her body as she sat completely upright on the couch. She gave off a loud yawn and she stretched her arms up to the ceilings, filling the room with the sound of bones cracking and setting as she worked out any kinks that had built up in her sleep. She finished her stretch with a loud sigh before allowing her arms to fall limply by her side. She gave a comedic smack of her lips while looking around the room. Mounds of clothing and food containers could be seen strewn across the floor, giving the room a rather messy appearance. The mess was entirely caused by her, which was a fact that irked her blonde housemate/kidnapper while bringing her a large amount of joy. Surprisingly, at least to her, the blonde seemed to detest the mess that had managed to build up within the main living area. The empty ramen packets seemed to serve as reminders of the ramen he hadn't gotten the chance to enjoy. The clothes and other miscellaneous junk only served to salt the wound. He never verbalized his agitation, though. She figured it was partly out of guilt of holding her captive. She used that phrase lightly since her occupation within the Uzumaki household felt far better than being held in captivity. Despite their rather odd and sometimes tumultuous relationship, the blonde was an amazing host. He brought her clothes, though she was sure that was only because he got tired of her kimono accidentally slipping throughout the day. He brought home food for her when he could, and when he couldn't, he made sure the kitchen was properly stocked. He even held conversations with her when she took a break from teasing him. All in all, she had enjoyed her stay within Naruto's home. She wished that she could have slept in the same bed as the blonde, but the couch would do for now. She would just have to wait until she was ready to confront her little sister, heal her relationship with said little sister, then convince that little sister to let her share her adorable blonde boyfriend. Easier said than done. The Nekashu muttered to herself before standing from the couch. She gave another long stretch of her body before heavily plodding over to the kitchen area of the apartment. She knew that she didn't have to worry about being quiet as her house guest was long gone. He always got up early to either open up the shop or to prepare food for the shop or to order something for the shop. Everything he does is either shop or Chiron related, Naya. The girl mused to herself out loud as she opened the door to the refrigerator. Every single morning, she liked to start the day off with a large glass of milk, courtesy of Naruto, of course. The action always seemed to annoy the blonde as he was constantly forced to buy more milk and not actually get a chance to enjoy it. The girl gave a nonchalant shrug while scanning over the contents of the fridge. Her eyes seemed to light up as they landed on the object of her affection. The spark of excitement instantly turned into one of curiosity as she noticed a small sticky note attached to the carton of milk. The girl verbalized as she withdrew the milk along with the note from the fridge. She absent-mindedly allowed the door to the kitchen appliance to slam shut behind her as she began to read the note out loud to herself. Dear Kuroka, odds are that you haven't noticed the fact that I've removed your collar if you're reading this. The girl instantly checked her neck to confirm. She was surprised to find that the collar that had been restraining her to the confines of Naruto's home was now missing. It's been a while since you first came into my house and tried to kill me. I originally put that collar on you to make sure you wouldn't kill me while I tried to convince you to not kill me. Probably wasn't the best plan, but it was the best I could come up with. I'm not much of a strategist. Anyways, I noticed that you haven't tried to kill me the past couple of weeks and I now trust you enough to let you go. I left some money by the door, hopefully enough to allow you to travel wherever you want. I hope that we can continue being friends and one day we can fix your relationship with Ko-chan. See you later. The girl finished reading. There was a small smiley face written next to the closing line of the note. Naya, the girl said dejectedly as she continued to stare down at the note. Weirdly, the concept of her freedom didn't bring her the type of joy she had expected. She had truly become comfortable under the blonde's care. I don't want to leave. I can't believe you turned into a devil while I turned out to be an exorcist. That's like the biggest coincidence ever. Irina exclaimed out loud, drawing the attention of the people around her. Beside her, Issei released a bout of nervous laughter before gently grabbing the girl's arm and pulling her away from the crowd. The childhood friend duo had been reunited when Zenobia and Irina had demanded a meeting with Rias. The exorcist duo had basically threatened the Gremrieris before demanding that the girl stay out of the situation with Kokabile while they handled it. The situation quickly devolved into violence, mainly to Kiba's vengeful nature and Zenovia's straightforwardness. Luckily, Irina, along with the help of Rias Queen, managed to defuse the situation by separating the volatile duo. After a bit of talking, Zenovia was eventually escorted out of the clubroom while Irina and Issei decided to take some time to catch up. This time consisted of Issei absent-mindedly guiding the exorcist around Kuo while trying his best to keep his eyes away from the skin-tight layer of clothing that hid the girl's rather perky assets. Yeah. It's pretty wild. The boy took in a silent gulp as he fought the internal battle to stare or not to stare. For someone that was as gifted in the art of perversion like himself, this was a hard-fought battle. Mew, I'm sorry about what Zenovia said about Asia-san. My partner can get very passionate about our religion. Irina muttered out nervously while glancing at Issei. During their meeting at Ria's clubroom, her partner had said some rather cruel thing about the former holy priestess that had sent the innocent girl into tears. That had just been the final straw to the eventual broken-up meeting. You don't have to apologize. I actually feel sorry for you having to deal with such a stuck-up prick as a partner. The boy started off angrily. Irina said nothing as the low-class devil fumed silently over the actions of her partner. His fuming behavior quickly devolved into a more embarrassed one as a small blush covered his cheeks. I guess I should also apologize for trying to use dress break on you. I was trying to keep up with you and I may have went a little over the line. The boy mumbled out his apology. Irina's own cheeks lit up in embarrassment as the memories of the boy's technique flew through her mind. The attack, if it could even be called one, seemed to instantly strip its victim of its clothing. She had fortunately managed to dodge getting hit by such an embarrassing move, but Asia and Kaneko had been unfortunate victims of it. It's fine. It was a battle and sometimes in battle, you have to use every advantage you got. I just feel sort of bad for your two peerage mates. The girl said the last bit hesitantly as she tried to find the best words to describe the other members of Ria's peerage. She didn't want to incur the boy's agitation, especially after being reunited so soon. She glanced back over to the teen to gauge his reaction and was panicked to find that he now seemed to be frozen in place. Her mind instantly went into a frenzy as she blamed her reference to his friends as the cause of his frozen state. Unknown to the exorcist, Issei's behavior was not the cause of anything, she said. If anything, she had only reminded him of why he should be panicking in the first place. He had stripped Asia and Kaneko with his technique. He had seen them completely naked. He had happily soaked in their nude forms. All of this wouldn't have been a problem if the Nekasho he had seen naked hadn't had a ridiculously powered blonde boyfriend who he was sure would tear him limb from limb if. No, when he found out about the incident. Oh God, he's going to kill me. He is going to kill me. Even the pain that came from thinking the Lord's name couldn't faze the boy's panic. Irina became increasingly worried as the color continued to drain from her friend's face. Issei. She mumbled hesitantly while gently touching his shoulder. The girl's touch seemed to snap the boy out of his daze as he jumped slightly. He looked around wildly, panic clear in his eyes, before his gaze eventually settled upon Irina. I am sorry about that, Irina. Got caught up in my thoughts. The boy nervously stuttered out. His explanation was met with confused looks from the exorcist, which only caused the devil to release another bout of nervous laughter. Just don't worry about it. The boy unexpectedly took the girl's hand into his own and began to drag her down the sidewalk. Irina, completely not expecting the action, could only sit in shock as the devil dragged her away. "May I take your order?" The couple standing at the counter couldn't help but feel a bit surprised at the person behind the cash register. The monotonous tone she was using was very off-putting, and her bored expression definitely did not make her out to be the best at customer service. Nevertheless, she had on a small visor with the store's design on it and also had a small smock wrapped around her waist. "Well?" The girl's voice snapped the male and female duo out of their momentary shock. The two gave each other a quick glance before the male of the two stepped towards the counter. "Ah. Yes. Can we have an order of?" The man made a mistake of looking into the girl's eyes. He found himself at a loss for words as he stared into her hazel eyes. The man stuttered, earning him a worried glance from his female companion. If his stuttering wasn't bad enough, he also began to shake slightly. His companion seemed to become even more worried as she took a hurried steps towards him. Kaneko couldn't help but sigh at the scene in front of her. This hadn't been the first time someone had reacted to her in a similar fashion. She had no idea why people reacted to her so weirdly, but she definitely knew that it was starting to get annoying. "Leave if you can't order." The girl's internal annoyance slipped into her tone as she addressed the shaken couple. Her voice seemed to snap the male out of his shock but also earn her the ire of the female. The woman took a demanding step forward as an irritated look crossed her face. "Pardon me? Is that any way to speak with your customers?" The woman angrily questioned. The Nekasha couldn't help but roll her eyes at the customer's question. If only she knew how little she cared. "You're not my customer until you order something, and you're also holding up the line," she responded in her usual monotone response. A shocked look crossed the woman's face before she quickly turned to verify the authenticity of Kaneko's claim. Standing behind the duo was a line of irate people that looked to be seconds away from cursing the woman out. This didn't seem to deter her much as she rounded on Kaneko once again with even more agitation clear on her face. "I don't care about those people. What I care about is that you have the nerve to treat the people you're serving as rude as you have treated my boyfriend." The woman's voice had risen in volume in an attempt to try and win the hearts of the agitated people standing directly behind her. Unfortunately for the woman, she didn't get very far as the crowd only seemed to grow even more irate at the sound of her voice. "You're annoying me and the people who are willing to order something. Leave please," Kaneko stated simply while giving a dismissive wave of her hand. The response seemed to shock the woman as she gave a physical recoil to the girl's words. Her jaw dropped as her eyes seemed to almost pop from out her head. She quickly recovered, however, as she picked her jaw up off the ground and squared her body to face Kaneko. "This is outrageous. I demand to see your manager. I will not leave until I do," the woman all but yelled. By this point, her boyfriend seemed to have recovered from his shock as he stood behind furious girlfriend, looking stuck between being embarrassed by her or wanting to support her. The man settled for remaining quiet and letting the situation play out. Kaneko gave a slight tilt of her head while saying nothing. Silence permeated the store as the two females entered into a staring match. The apathetic gaze of the Nekasha combated the angry glare of the nameless woman as the tension between the two seemed to rise dramatically. This silent battle of wills continued for several long, uninterrupted seconds before the girl gave an uncaring shrug. "Sure," was her simple reply before hopping off of her stool. The irate woman watched intensely as the girl leisurely strolled towards the back of the shop and disappeared behind its curtains. Once the girl was gone, the woman seemed to visibly relax before suddenly turning on her boyfriend, seemingly more mad than ever. "Can you believe this? How much nerve does this little girl have? I'm going to tear into her manager. They shouldn't have someone like her as the cash register. I hope she gets fired." The woman fired off in rapid succession. All her boyfriend could do was simply nod in response and hope that she wouldn't find a reason to focus her agitation on him. Ahem. The sound of someone clearing their throat interrupted the woman's ranting. In a smooth motion, she turned on the spot, ready to fire off on the person that had interrupted her only to freeze when she came face to face, chest, with the figure. "Is there something I can do for you?" The woman was forced to focus her gaze upwards to look into the eyes of the man in front of her. His form, while not overly tall, seemed to tower over her in every shape and form. His scruffy blonde hair, large frame, cocky smirk and electric blue eyes did not help to rid him of an image of someone who did not belong in a candy shop. The woman didn't let this bother her though. She had already came this far and her anger needed someone to be directed at. If this man wanted to step up and be that person, so be it. That depends. Are you the manager? Because I don't want to speak to anyone unless they are the manager. The woman stated hotly. Her comment was met with a light smirk from the blonde man before his face took on a bashful expression as he began to rub the back of his neck. I don't know if they count as the same thing, but I am the owner. That's gotta count for something, right? The blonde said before releasing a loud laugh. A momentary hesitation fell over the woman at the revelation, but she quickly pushed the feeling aside to continue her crusade against bad customer service. Even better. The woman started off as her confidence seemed to be restored. Just what kind of place are you running? The girl at the register was rude and completely unprofessional. Naruto couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at the irate woman standing before him. During the brief lifespan of his shop, he didn't really have to deal with many angry or dissatisfied customers, so the experience was rather new to him. If he remembered correctly, you were supposed to appease the customer in these type of situations because the customer was always right. That's completely bullshit. If the customer was always right, they would always choose to order the Uzumaki special ramen-flavored ice cream. The blonde's thoughts shifted to the seldom, never, ordered special he had put in place several weeks ago. He had expected the item to sell like crazy, just like the rest of his items, but it seemed that people didn't have the same passion about ramen as he thought they would. They don't know what they're missing out on. The blonde mused to himself. His Uzumaki special was the best item on his menu. Even Kaneko had said so. It had taken a full week to convince the girl to actually try it, but when she did, she loved it. It was after having this thought that Naruto realized that he still had an irate customer standing in front of him. His silence only seemed to have had a negative effect on her mood as she came off as even angrier. The blonde started off, momentarily forgetting just why exactly the woman was angry. He felt a soft pressure on his side and looked down to see Kaneko now standing by his side. Her presence triggered the blonde's memory as he turned to face the woman again. I'm sorry that my employee. Naruto sent a quick side glance down to Kaneko. He figured for this situation would be better not to outright say the nature of their relationship. He figured that her knowing it would only agitate the woman further. Offended you? The blonde finished off rather lamely after such a long pause. His short statement was met with a bewildered look from the woman and a small sigh from her male companion. Is that it? I'm sorry? She questioned incredulously. Naruto's eyebrow shot up as he began to inspect the woman. Are you hurt or something? I know some first aid. Naruto questioned back, making the woman physically recoil. She looked almost disgusted at the blonde's question as she looked around the restaurant as if for confirmation that the blonde was being serious. No, you idiot. I'm not hurt. Your employee was being disrespectful and I think I should get some type of reparations for having to suffer through it. The woman fired back. Her response seemed to confuse the blonde as a perplexed look crossed his face. But, why? I mean, I can understand an apology, but why should I have to give you something in return? If you're that offended, why don't you just leave or something? Kaneko couldn't help but release a small chuckle at the unintended bluntness behind her boyfriend's statement. The no-nonsense logic he was putting to use would usually be okay in any other situation, but in the food industry where the customer was always right, it came off as a bit rude. The woman didn't seem to share the same sense of humor as Kaneko as her face took on its angriest expression yet. Several high-pitched, guttural noises left her mouth as her body tensed up immensely. She looked towards her boyfriend, receiving only a small shrug in return, before turning to face Naruto. You know what? The woman started with a loud huff. You're right. I'm not going to sit here and take this rudeness from you. I hope you know that I will be leaving the worst review of your store possible. I will tell all my friends to never come here. Ever. With that, the woman charged out of the shop with a loud huff. Her boyfriend remained behind for several seconds, dejectedly looking at the treats he would be unable to eat before sadly following after his girlfriend. Well, she wasn't nice. Naruto commented after several seconds of silence. Kaneko released a small shrug before reaching behind her back to untie her knot holding her apron together. Without a second of hesitation, she threw the garment in the blonde's face before heading towards the counter of the shop. Hey! The blonde indignantly yelled as he ripped the sugar-covered piece of cloth off his face. By the time he had cleared his vision, the Nekashu was standing in front of him with her backpack loosely slung over her shoulder. Leaving already? Questioned the blonde. Clubroom. Mandatory meeting with some special guests. The girl stated. A crestfallen look quickly crossed the blonde's face before he spread his arms out wide. Kaneko rolled her eyes at the teen's gesture before making her way towards him. When she came within arm's reach of the shinobi, he quickly scooped her up into a massive bear hug while lifting her off of her feet. A small smile worked its way onto her usual stoic face as her boyfriend held the embrace for several seconds before lowering her back down onto her feet. Do you always have to do that whenever I leave? Kaneko mumbled softly as she readjusted her backpack. The hug had attracted the attention of the customers around the duo, making the urge to leave the shop even greater within the nekashu. Yes, I do. Now stop complaining and stop keeping your friends waiting. The cheerfully said while giving the girl a small pat on the head. The girl quickly shook away the boy's appendage with a small blush staining her cheeks. She muttered a silent goodbye to the blonde before leaving the confines of the shop. If you could please stop staring at your girlfriend's ass, we have more important issues to discuss. The blonde sputtered at being caught so easily before quickly regaining his composure. With a quick glance towards his remaining customers, the blonde quickly made his way to the back room of his store. I know what you're talking about, but I don't think we have to worry about it. Yeah, they've been lingering around the shop for a bit, but I don't sense any bad intent coming from them. The blonde thought to his partner before making a clone to take his place outside the shop. With his customers taken care of, the shinobi settled down onto the floor of the shop. Recently there have been a bunch of people who haven't shown malicious intent but still turn out to be a thorn in your side. Kurama's comment earned him a small chuckle from the blonde as the sage got into a meditative stance. Stop worrying so much. We can take whatever anyone has to throw at us. After all, if we can survive a fight with the dragon god, what's the worst that can happen? What's the matter, devil child? What happened to the passion I felt earlier? What happened to the hate I can still sense flowing through your veins? Give it to me. The remnants of his weapon laid fading around him. Dozen upon dozens of his sword were now broken shards of metal. His own blood decorated the ground along with the broken remains of his sword birth. Kiba's chest rose and fell heavily as he stood in a shaky stance. Clasped in his hand was one of his newest swords, the Holy Eraser. Despite its name, the sword hadn't been doing him much good against the crazed exorcist. Well? Come on, you shitty, little devil. Show me what you got. Fried yelled before charging at the devil. The exorcist had his own sword, his much more elegant than the one in Kiba's hand. The sword was, in shape, similar to that of a kris. The blade of the weapon was freakishly wide and diamond-shaped. Two spikes protruded out near the bottom of the blade. Kiba didn't have time to fully observe the holy blade as he was forced to raise his blade in order to block a blow from the exorcist. The devil felt his muscles buckle under the force of the man's blade as a power struggle took place. Kiba quickly realized he would be on the losing end of the struggle as he jumped away from the blonde and settled into a defensive stance. Am I going to have to start all the fun? Fried yelled before charging even faster after the devil. This time, Kiba was giving no time to rest as strike after strike was rained down upon him. It took everything in him to counter the man's swordplay, ultimately leaving him a bloodied, panting and breathless mess. The exorcist released a loud bout of laughter before sending an overhead strike down onto Kiba. The devil raised his sword to block the strike and was sent staggering backwards in response. With the devil off balance, the man quickly pressed his advantage, slashing at the boy's chest, cutting through his clothing, flesh and muscle. Did I leave a boo-boo? Fried joyfully proclaimed as Kiba stumbled backwards while clutching onto his wounded chest. The devil managed to regain his balance with the usage of his sword before taking off towards the exorcist. Yes! This is the fire I wanted to see. Show me what you got. Fried yelled as Kiba took the offensive. Every strike sent out by the devil was fueled by the boy's rage and was meant to kill. Unfortunately, none of them landed their mark as Fried skillfully blocked and parried whatever came his way. Shit! I'm starting to grow bored. Fried yawned out as he lazily blocked a particularly vicious blow from the teen. With a flick of his wrist, the exorcist sent the devil flying off of his feet. The blonde recovered in midair and managed to land lightly on his feet before once again taking off towards the exorcist. Fried, seeing the incoming threat, released a disgustingly pleasure-filled moan before raising his blade into the air. No more sword for you. Keep up. Within a single second, the blade within Kiba's hand shattered as if made from glass. The devil didn't even have time to react before a foot planted itself firmly within his chest and sent him flying through the air. "You're too slow. You're too slow. I hit you 7 different times and I bet you didn't even notice." The exorcist sang out loud as he watched the devil bounce limply against the ground. The man's laughter boomed throughout the empty plaza as Kiba laid still on the ground. The laughter was quickly put to a stop when the devil released a loud groan, shakily standing to his feet. The devil looked worse for wear as he struggled to stay on his feet. His body was littered with stab wounds and bruises from where Fried had struck him. A thin line of blood was flowing from his lips. Every inch of his body was shaking violently as he fought the urge to collapse to the ground. "Looks like you still a little left in the tank. Good. I can't wait to continue beating your ass." The man didn't get to finish as he was suddenly and unexpectedly kicked in the side of his head. The force of the kick was enough to lift the exorcist off of his feet and send him flying several meters away. "Kaneko." Kiba managed to stutter out through the pain. Standing in the spot where Fried once stood was the devil's fellow peerage member. The girl's backpack was slung loosely over her right shoulder as she looked stoically at her injured classmate. "Senpai. Looks like you need help," Kaneko stated in her usual tone of voice before taking several steps towards the injured devil. Her advance was interrupted as the man she had previously kicked in the head decided to make his presence known to the devil duo. "Now there's 2. They just keep multiplying." "Oh, what fun!" the man exclaimed as he ran towards duo. Kiba looked ready to confront the exorcist but was stopped when Kaneko held out her hand towards him. "Rest. You can't fight." Kiba wasn't fit to argue in his current state, so he decided to oblige by the girl's will and sit. With the knowledge that her partner wouldn't interrupt, Kaneko turned to confront the charging exorcist. The man had recovered much of the distance he had been kicked during the Nekashu's talk with Kiba. This didn't seem to bother the girl as much as she settled into a loose stance and for the man to approach. "Come here, little kitty cat," Fried yelled while charging at the Nekashu. The man quickly got within striking range of the girl and immediately attempted to take the girl's head off with a side swipe of his sword. Unfortunately for the man, it wasn't meant to be as his wrist was seized within the girl's grip. Before the man could react, his wrist was snapped with a sickening crunch and pop before he was slammed mercilessly into the ground by the small girl. "OSH!" The man was interrupted once again as Kaneko's fist slammed into his head, sending him deeper into the ground. The girl would have landed yet another hit if a volley of crossbow bolts hadn't forced her to jump away from the downed man. "Fried! Stop with the obscenities and collect your weapon. We have more important matters to take care of." Kiba's eyes widened at the sound of his voice as he attempted to stand to his feet. Due to his current condition, all the devil could manage to do was to get several inches off the ground only to collapse back down. "Valper!" Kiba grunted out through his pain as he laid eyes onto his childhood torturer. The man sent an apathetic side glance down at the injured devil before refocusing his attention back onto the exorcist. At this time, the man had managed to recover his sword and scramble back up to his feet. "Old man, why do you have to ruin all my fun? I was just getting into it with these shitty little devils." The exorcist whined in a childish voice that was not meant for someone his age. The genocide archbishop rolled his eyes at the childlike behavior of his charge as he shouldered his crossbow. "Do not test me, child. You've already made me do more than originally planned. Retreat. Now." The man left no room for argument as he leveled his crossbow at the former exorcist. Fried, seeing he had no other option, wisely chose to obey the man's wishes while grumbling incoherently beneath his breath. "Don't ignore me." The excommunicated church member's attention was brought back to the injured devil as Kiba shouted out. This time, with the help of one of his swords, the boy managed to climb back up to his feet. The devil's face was screwed in a mixture of hate and concentration as he glared at the man. "I remember you. I had figured you would have died with the rest of them. It's a shame to see that even my trash has sided with the devil." The man's comment made Kiba see red as he attempted to take off towards the former bishop. Unfortunately, due to his condition, he only managed a couple of steps before his legs gave out under him. Fortunately for the boy, Kaneko was there to catch him before he could fall to the ground. Release me." Kiba grunted out as he attempted to stand back on his feet. Kaneko ignored the devil's protests and instead focused on keeping him on his feet. The devil watched in anger as Fried quickly leaped over to his partner position and lifted him from his feet. A guttural growl left his throat as he watched the dark exorcist effortlessly leap away with the man on his back. You let him get away. You stopped me from getting my revenge. Kiba growled out as Fried and Valper disappeared from his sight. I stopped you from getting killed. Now, be quiet. Ryusama needs us. Before the blonde could protest, the Nekashu teleported the duo away. Another, my fine dessert connoisseur. I don't think I'll be able to sleep tonight if I don't get another taste of your amazing sweets. Closing time had long since passed for Uzumaki's sweets, but the shop was still open. The bright lights illuminating the interior of the shop spilled out through the windows and onto the streets. Despite the lateness, the shop actually had several occupants, all of whom were sat/stood at its counter. The tallest of the customers was a handsome, black-haired man dressed in a Japanese schoolboy's uniform. Strapped to his back was a large spear that covered the entirety of his back. Sat in front of the man on the counter while a multitude of empty dishes. Sat on either side of the man was a single man. To his right sat a young, black-haired man wearing a pair of spectacles and the same pair of clothes his partner was wearing. Overall, he seemed to have a shy demeanor as he silently sat and ate the dessert in front of him. Sat to his right was a man who looked to be the exact opposite. He was a handsome young man with mid-length silver-white hair. He was dressed in a uniform similar to the one the other two occupants wore. The interesting thing about the man was the amount of swords attached to his body. 2 were strapped to each side of his waist while 1 sat diagonally across his back. The man looked serene as he slowly consumed his food. Naruto didn't seem to be too bothered by the amount of weaponry the men carried. In all actuality, the blonde looked excited as he dashed from end to end of his counter, making and pushing out all types of dishes to the trio of men. You got it. Another Uzumaki special on its way. Naruto beamed out before beginning to make the dish. The spear wielder seemed to be appeased by the teen's comment as he sat back down in his seat. He shared a knowing look between his two partners as they watched the blonde deftly prepare their food. The shop owner seemed ignorant to the look shared between them as he put his full focus into his food. You know, up until recently I was completely unaware of you and your lovely shop. The man started off as he directed his gaze onto the blonde. Naruto only hesitated in his movement for a second before his hands went back to work. I'm still sort of new to the area, so that's probably why. The neighborhood seems to be welcoming me pretty well though. He punctuated his statement with a nervous chuckle while doing his patent head scratch with one hand and kneading dough with the other. The lead male brushed off the strange showcase of multitasking in order to speak again. I can see why. Your dishes are delicious. Everything I've been hearing about you is chalking up to be pretty accurate. The man stated casually just as Naruto placed his Uzumaki special in front of him. The blonde gave a slight tilt of his head as he stood in front of the trio. I hope the things you've heard have been good. Just today I had a lady threaten to leave the worst review ever. The blonde sheepishly stated. The bespectacled man twitched nervously at his words, catching Naruto's attention. The shinobi let his gaze on the man linger for only a few short seconds before veering his attention back to the black-haired man. Oh, trust me, it's been nothing but good. The things I've heard about you have, as you say, piqued my interest. The man's tone and body language seemed to shift as he locked eyes with the blonde. To his side, both of his partners shifted as the carefree atmosphere between the groups slowly faded away. What do you mean by that? Naruto's face was one of innocence and ignorance as he directed his question back at the spear wielder. The man took it all in stride as he sat straighter in his seat. Oh, nothing serious. It's just that you usually don't hear about someone surviving an encounter with Ophis. When I heard what you had done, I knew I needed to meet you in person. With those words, any ignorance the blonde had been feigning immediately faded away. The man's two companions seemed to pick this up as they became much tenser and alert. I see. The shinobi started off before crossing his arms across his chest. The action caused the man's companions to flinch but nothing else. Their leader didn't seem too bothered by the action as a small smirk slowly worked its way onto his face. Yes. Now, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Chow Chow and these are partners, George and Siegfried. The newly revealed Chow said while pointing towards the two men. George gave a nervous nod of his head while Siegfried offered nothing but a slight narrowing of his eyes. You could say that we are associates of Ophis, but our goals are separate from her own. Chao quickly explained when Naruto began reach for his waist. His explanation seemed to appease the blonde as he stopped the action. Oh really? And let me guess, you want me to help you achieve these goals? Naruto's comment and sardonic tone earned him a small chuckle from the leader of the hero faction as the man seemed to relax in his seat. I see that you have gone through this process before. If what I heard about your encounter with Ophis is true, then I can see why you seem a little jaded at our presence. But at least allow me to explain my goals before you place your judgment. Chao offered up. He was met with silence at first as Naruto seemed to contemplate his request. The man knew immediately the blonde's choice when the shinobi released a soft sigh and unfolded his arms. Fine. I'll hear you out, but only because you haven't tried to take my head off yet. Once again, the blonde received a chuckle from Chao before the hero descendant began to speak. I would first like to inform you that the people I work with have a singular goal, and that is for the advancement of the human species. As you are already aware, the threat to mankind is not just ourselves. It is the devils, the angels, the dragons, and even the gods. I feel that it is my job to push mankind to be able to compete and protect ourselves from the supernatural threat that these beings pose. I've been recruiting humans with especially extraordinary talents to assist me in my goal. I would love to have you join us. Naruto had to give it to the man. He was definitely charismatic. The way the man spoke was filled with confidence and conviction that would have swayed a majority of weaker men and women. Unfortunately for Chao, Naruto could easily see past the relatively thin veil of charisma in order to question the man. You claim to hate dragons and gods, yet you are apparently working with Ophis. That seems a little odd, don't you think? Naruto questioned. His question procured him a small sigh from the descendant as the man gave a strong shake of his head. There are things you must do in order to achieve your goals. Working with that girl is not something I enjoy doing, but it is a necessary, for now. Soon though, we will no longer have any need for her and will properly dispose of her. Chao spoke. Naruto gave a small hum in response as his arm shot up to rub his chin. While all this sounds tempting and you seem like a pretty nice guy, Naruto started off. I don't think I can sign on to your cause. I don't think I have the same amount of passion that you have on the topic. Naruto finished sincerely while offering the man a polite nod of his head. The blonde's comment seemed to agitate the swordsman of the group as the man shot up from his seat while reaching for one of the many swords attached to his hip. He was stopped, however, when Chao reached out his arm, effectively blocking the path between the two. I understand. The man's comment seemed to catch his partners by surprise. He stood from his seat before offering a low bow to his blonde host. I respect your decision and choose not to pursue the issue any further. The man promptly turned and began to walk towards the entrance of the store, leaving his two companions at the counter. The duo remained there for several seconds, seemingly too shocked to move before eventually following after their leader. The trio reached the door of the shop and looked prepared to exit before Chao froze, causing his two partners to stop in their tracks as well. But the man turned to face Naruto as a small smile crossed his face. If you ever find that your mind has changed, know that the offer is still on the table. Just voice your desire and I will be there to answer. I hope to see each other in the future. With those parting and rather cryptic words, the man turned and exited the store with his two companions trailing him, leaving the blonde once again alone in his shop. I can tell that he's going to be a pain in the ass. He couldn't help but think to himself before glancing down at the counter. Left on it was a multitude of bills that added up exactly to be the amount of the man's check. Next to the stack of bills was a single sheet of paper that was covered in an intricate and indiscernible design. The only aspect of the seal that Naruto could make out was a twin pair of swords going through its center along with a spear running straight down its center. Written below the design were 4 simple words. I will be watching. Naruto read out loud as he raised the paper to eye level. After studying the design for several seconds, the blonde couldn't help but sigh before pocketing the small slip of paper. He then began the painstaking task of cleaning up the mess left behind by the trio as a single thought continuously played through his head. I'm going to have to deal with another black-haired prick, aren't I? Kami, what did I ever do to deserve this? Chapter 20. The mid-afternoon sun hung high up in the air over Kuo Academy, lazily shining down the last remnants of its rays. The school day had ended over an hour ago and the weekend was on the horizon, so only a few students could be seen milling about the campus grounds. Even fewer could be found within the school itself. Among the few was a particular group of devils that were sharing a discussion. All in all, the image of the school made for a rather peaceful setting. The sun was slowly making its descent through the sky and was throwing an orange hue over the city. A small flock of birds flew high through the sky, throwing miniature shadows across the ground as they flexed their wings in order to fight against the pull of gravity. If one were to look hard enough, they would be able to distinguish another figure floating high in the cool afternoon sky. The figure's 10 black wings kept him afloat in the air as he peered down at the serene scene below him. Moments like these makes me detest the weakness that has been bred from this piece. The man said out loud before releasing a small sigh. The fallen angel flexed his wings slightly, sending him further up into the air as spears of light began to phase into existence around him. I refuse to allow these devils to poison my air with their presence. It is up to me to take their extermination into my own hands. The fallen angel spoke as he finished his ascent. At the apex of his flight, hundreds upon hundreds of light spears were now surrounding him, making for a brilliant but deadly light display. All remained calm for several long seconds before, with a simple flick of his wrist, the man sent his rain of light spears down upon the school. Let the games begin. Something was wrong. He could feel it. As soon as he stepped foot into his house, he could sense it. Something was off. He couldn't tell what was wrong, but he could. Something was off. The blonde gently closed the door behind him as he warily took a step into his living room. The area of strangely quiet, something that he initially chalked up to Kuroka's departure. The Nekasha had been the source of liveliness within his home for the past several weeks, and he knew that without her, his house would be much more quiet. But her absence wasn't what was giving him such a strange feeling. It was something else. He could sense something off within his house. He didn't like the feeling. The creaking of his floorboards. Down the hall to the left in the southernmost room. His bedroom. His brow creased in frustration as the realization came over him. Someone was in his bedroom. No one had stepped foot into that room aside from Kuroka. Not even Kaneko had been in there. The blonde was ghost-like as he slowly glided his way down the hallway. The slight creaking noise he had heard previously increased in volume with each soundless step he took. He could make out the sound of light breathing coming from the opposite side of his door. His brow furrowed in frustration as a kunai silently appeared within his hand. The blonde didn't even make proper usage of his door as he reappeared within his room in a bright flash of yellow light. He had immediately settled down into a crouch while his kunai remained drawn, ready to strike out at anything that so much as twitched. His eyes began to scan the small room for the intruder, and he didn't have to search far. "Oh Kami, what are you doing here?" Chaos. There was no other way to describe just what exactly was going on Ko Academy grounds. The once peaceful schoolyard had turned into a breeding ground of disarray as chaos ran rampant. This is what Rias was facing. In all honesty, she should have seen this coming. Her position as potential clan heir demanded that she be more tactful when it came to matters such as this. Fallen angels within devil territory should have been a big enough warning sign to her. She should have been preparing herself and her peerage. She should have expected this. But she didn't, and now she was paying for it. The girl cleared her head as she took into account her surroundings. The school building had taken the brunt of the attack, and it definitely showed. Even from her position on the utmost bottom floor, she had a full view of the lavender-stained sky through one of the many gaping holes that littered the building's exterior. Along with the oddly colored sky, Rias also had a full view of the hundreds of fallen angels, shades, and what looked to be demons that were making their way onto her campus. Rias. The girl was snapped out of her thoughts when she felt two presences land near her prone form. She turned her head and was relieved to see her fellow heiress, along with her queen, now standing by her side. The girl's bespectacled eyes shone with worry as she stared at the faintly injured girl. "I am glad to see you," the redhead muttered out as the two devils helped her up to her feet. Once standing, the girl did a quick readjustment of her hair and clothing, much to the amusement of her two companions, before beginning to address them. "Do you have any idea what is going on?" Rias questioned as she stared out on the despondent scene that had taken over their campus. Sona gave a slight shake of her head before gently pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. "Not exactly. We were all taken by surprise. All I am able to deduce is that the perpetrator is a fallen angel." Rias nodded, having come to the same conclusion just by looking outside. That wasn't good. The enemy had and still has the element of surprise. She was uninformed, and her peerage was split apart. This was definitely not looking good for her. Incredulous. That was the best way to describe the blonde shinobi as he stared at the two occupants of his room. His mouth stood gaping open for several seconds as he attempted to articulate his confusion before the words finally came to mind. What the hell are you doing in my house? Blunt? Yes, but when someone who was attempting to kill you only a few weeks prior found their way into your bedroom and was just leisurely lying on your bed, you had the right to be blunt. Ophis gave a dry glance in response as she shifted slightly on the blonde's bed. The movement set the teen on guard as two kunai found their way into his hands while he slid into a more defensive stance. His actions earned him yet another glance from the god before she directed her full attention onto him. I told you I would find you, Naruto Uzumaki. Her tone was flat, dead even, as she stared directly into Naruto's eyes. The teen's nerves were set on edge as he mentally prepared for a fight to break out. His mind began to run through a dozen different scenarios on how to properly subdue the god with the least amount of damage to the surrounding area. Their last fight in the dimensional gap had resulted in zero collateral damage merely because of the fact that there was nothing nearby to be destroyed. With them being so close to the city, he knew that if a fight were to break out, thousands would end up dead. Luckily for the blonde, he had no need to worry as the primordial being abruptly cut off the staring contest by facing forward and closing her eyes. Silence followed the ending contest as Naruto stared owlishly at his supposed enemy. The little girl looked as calm and serene as ever as she sat cross-legged, her eyes closed in peaceful concentration as if he wasn't standing not 10 feet away from her. The boy didn't even manage to get a single word out before Ophis' hand shot up. Naruto immediately jumped back, his hands flashing through a set of seals for a technique that would be able to nullify whatever the god threw at him. But once again, the blonde had nothing to fear as Ophis merely raised a single finger up before pressing it against her lips, a soft shushing sound emitting from her before she returned to her meditative state. Naruto blinked as his arms fell limply down to his side. He blinked again as the fresh memory of the girl shushing him overlapped with the memory of the very same girl attempting to harvest him of his power. The two images did not mix very well together, forcing the blonde to blink once again to rid his mind of the mental projection. Did you just shush me? The blonde finally managed to question after staring at the girl for several more seconds. A single eye creaked open as the dragon shot him the most intense death glare he had the misfortune of ever receiving. Yes. Now remain quiet. Ophis simply stated before shutting her eyes once again. Naruto could go returning to gaping at the blatant and completely odd behavior the girl was showing. Just a few weeks ago she was trying to kill him. This didn't make any sense. Calm down, brat. Kurama's voice rebounded through the blonde's head, causing the panic he was feeling to quickly dissipate. You don't have to worry right now. Naruto couldn't help the stupefied look that crossed his face at his partner's words. Were they talking about the same person right now? Kurama had been right by his side when the duo were battling for their lives against the dragon god. They hadn't even been able to land a lasting blow on the girl and now he was being told not to worry? It didn't make any sense. What do you mean by don't worry? She tried to kill us. She is literally 5 feet away from us. Are you not worried? Naruto thought/internally shouted as he tried his best not to allow his emotions to show on his face. He seemed to be doing a decent enough job as Ophis showed no reaction while he stood. Though, with the girl's natural stoicism, it was truly hard to tell. And don't you think if she wanted to deal you any harm she would have done it by now? Think for a second, kid. Look at her. Kurama was once again serving as the voice of reason within the duo's tumultuous relationship as he spoke. His words served to restore the blonde's senses as he took a second to fully observe the god. Her position hadn't changed during his entire inner monologue as she continued to sit with her back against his wall and her legs stretched across her leg. She was wearing the Lolita-style dress and headband from the day the duo had first encountered each other. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap as her long black hair fell down the length of her back. Overall, she looked like an innocent, young girl and not like a god that had been seemingly eager to kill him. I don't mean physically, you idiot. Go into your toad mode or whatever simple-minded name you gave it. Naruto let out a soft grumble at the bad-mouthing of his sage mode but let the issue slide in favor of activating the technique. He felt nature's energy pour into him by the bucket loud and along with it came all its hate. By now, the ritual of filtering out the emotion had become almost mindless to the blonde as his body went about purifying the energy. It only took him a few short seconds before he opened his eyes again, revealing the now orange pigmentation contained within them. With his Sage mode activated, the blonde spared another glance towards the dragon even though the act of looking at her was completely unnecessary. Her energy was potent enough that he could have easily sensed it without going into Sage mode. It was rolling off of her in the form of tiny snakes that dissipated harmlessly in the air as when they got too far from the girl. It was an odd yet strangely mesmerizing sight. It was so enchanting that Naruto quickly became lost within staring at the scene. "You're so helpless," the tailed beast grumbled, snapping the blonde out of his trance. He had the decency to blush at being distracted so easily before refocusing his attention back onto Ophis. Her energy. It wasn't as intense as before. In the dimensional gap, her energy had been damn near crushing. It had surrounded him with each move he made and he could almost taste it within the air during their fight. The energy the girl was putting out now was still more than he had sensed any single person ever. He couldn't even hope to match it alone. But it was still nowhere close to what he felt during their fight together. Exactly. After fighting with you and that other dragon, she most likely exhausted a large amount of her energy. While it is a drop in the bucket compared to her overall reserves, she must realize it's enough to make a difference in a fight. Kurama explained, earning him a hesitant nod from the blonde. The idea of a god expending enough of their power to even put a dent in their massive reserves was a bit hard for him to wrap his mind around, but he could accept it. Some would call his own energy reserves monstrous and unending, yet he had found himself on the verge of death from exhaustion many times. Still, that didn't explain why she decided to invade his home. It's probably because she knows you have a bleeding heart and won't attack her while she's weakened. She gets the extra benefit of observing you while also allowing her reserves to recover using the purified chakra you've been pumping out. It's a win-win situation for her. Naruto let out a light curse at the truth behind his partner's words. He had absolutely no way to attack the dragon without her retaliating and possibly destroying the city, excluding the truth-seeking orbs. The urge to use his ultimate technique was strong as he stared at Ophis' unmoving form. He had even began to build up chakra in anticipation of activating his cloak as his gaze focused on the girl for any sign of movement from the girl. When he found none, the blonde released a long sigh before allowing his chakra to dissipate, eliciting an amused chuckle from his partner. "It's not funny, Kurama. She's a god who wants to kill us." The blonde mentally shouted at his partner. "She wants to harvest and use our power. She doesn't want to kill us. There's nothing you can do at the moment, child, so stop panicking. Just stay on your guard and take it from there." Another sigh escaped the blonde's lips as he acquiesced to his partner's request. After all, what's the worst that could happen? The brief image of Ko turned into a smoking crater with Ophis floating lazily over its remain with his limp body in his grip flashed through his head. A shudder ran through his body as the image disappeared as quick as it came. He really needed to stop asking that question. The sound of bone cracking beneath the force of her fist reached her ears. Inwardly, she felt disgust as she watched the fallen angel tumble to the ground, his face a bloody mess as he screamed while clutching to his now disfigured nose. Outwardly, her face was set into its usual stoic mask as she brought her foot up and smashed into the men's head, sending him into blissful unconsciousness, or death. She didn't stick around to see. Kaneko turned her head to observe the chaos that was surrounding her. She had actually been on her way to Naruto's house when the sight of a sky full of light spears caught her attention. The blonde had taken a sort of half-day off of work today for them to spend some time together. But the figure of a fallen angel flying high in the sky was all the incentive she needed to reverse her direction and come sprinting back to Ko. When she arrived, she was immediately assaulted by a group of fallen angel. The pest had made the school their playground as they assaulted anything that didn't have black wings. A trio had come to confront her, their intentions clear as they wielded light spears. They would never get a chance to use them as the Nekasha ripped her way through their ranks, the girl's claws tearing their way through the grunts with a practiced ease. Her training with Naruto proved to be a huge boon as she found herself literally dancing around all of their attacks. An explosion caught her attention. She turned her head and was relieved to see her king firing off her power of destruction in the shape of a sphere at anything that moved, the attack proving to be devastating as it reduced a group of shades and fallen angels to dust. With the imminent threat taken care of, Kaneko quickly made her way over to the king to check her condition. "Ryo-sama." A sigh of relief left the heiresses at the sound of a familiar voice. A light sheen of sweat covered her brow as she turned towards the friendly face. After fighting off fallen angel after fallen angel, it was nice to see the ever-calm face of her bishop. The girl's untouched schoolgirl outfit made for a humorously dark contrast on the ruined battlefield. Though, the girl's blood-covered gauntlets showed she had definitely seen combat. "Ko-chan, you have no idea how glad I am to see you," were the first words out of the girl's mouth as the younger girl settled in front of her. The Nekashu looked to be about to respond but stopped as a shadow fell over the duo. Rias, taking notice of the girl's behavior, turned to see what had caused the girl to react in such a way. The heiress soon felt herself rooted in place as she came face to face with the cause of the current state of the school. "A gremmery. The last time I encountered one of your kind, I was making the ground match the color of their obnoxious hair color. It's a slight pity to see that you pests haven't managed to die out yet. Though, I am glad that I will be able to help to rid the world of you rats." The man smelled of death. His sickly, pale skin seemed to glow even in the dark overcast that had fallen over the school. His wings were spread out behind him, keeping him afloat in the air above the two devils. His face looked stuck between shooting the girls a sneer and smirking at all the destruction that surrounded him. "Kokabil. I would never guess a biblical figure would be the cause of all this," Ria said to the man in a calm manner, her years of etiquette training paying off as she didn't reveal the mass amount of panic she was feeling at the man's presence. Anyone whose name appeared in the Bible and managed to survive until now was someone to be feared. She wasn't ready to face someone of that caliber. Even with her peerage, she wasn't ready to face someone like that. This thought didn't seem to be shared by all members of her peerage as Kokabil was forced to strafe to the side in order to dodge a brown blur. The fallen angel watched the blur come to a skidding halt against the ground, revealing its identity to be Issei. Kokabil didn't have much time contemplate the appearance of the human-turned-devil as an Asian-style dragon made of lightning slammed into him, carrying the fallen angel away in a large shower of sparks. The dragon lifted the biblical figure a full 100 feet into the air before exploding into a beautiful display of yellow and white yellow. "The trash is now dealt with." Rias turned her head and relief flooded through her system when she saw her queen standing on the opposite side of the schoolyard. The girl's usual playful aura was nowhere to be seen as she glared up at the sky where her dragon had taken Kokabil. "Akino-senpai, that was so freaking cool." Issei's praise of his teammate came to a screeching halt as Akino turned her attention onto him. The warm, playful teasing that could usually be seen behind those lavender orbs were nowhere to be seen as in frost-like agitation took its place. All it took was a single look for Issei to get the message that now was not the time for praise. "Is that Barakil's brat? I haven't seen you since you were a small child." Akino's attention was snapped back to the air as Kokabil's voice rang out from the shower of sparks. The fallen angel descended from the sky, completely unscathed from Akino's attack. If anything, he looked amused as he stared down at the group of devils. Akino's expression hardened to an even greater extent as the man lazily kept afloat over their heads. "Do not say that man's name to me." An uncharacteristic growl left the girl's throat as she stared up at the man. Her action drew worried looks from her fellow as Kokabil released a dark chuckle. "Daddy issues? Don't worry, child, even I have those. Let me release you from such a trivial matter." Within a blink of an eye, a light spear was in the fallen angel's hand. Before Akino could even draw breath, the spear had already crossed half the distance. By the time she was able to tense her muscles to move, the spear was 10 feet away from piercing her chest. A brown blur. That was all Akino managed to see before Issei appeared in front of her, his gauntlet raised to defend her. The light spear deflected harmlessly off of the boy's gauntlet, careening back towards the sky where it exploded in a bright flash of light. "Looks like all the little devils have arrived." "Good, it'll make it a low." The man cut himself off as he was forced to twist his body in midair to dodge a thrown sword. The weapon flew by him at a ridiculously fast speed, barely missing the fallen angel as it flew out of eyesight. "Seems like I spoke too soon." The fallen angel glanced down to the new arrival on the battlefield. Stood only a few feet from the rest of the devils was one Yudokiba, though to anyone that knew the boy, they could tell something was different about him. A certain calmness hung over the boy's head as he shouldered a massive sword. The thing looked to be as large, if not larger, than the devil himself, yet Kiba didn't show any sign of strain as he carried the weapon. "Someone's gotten a new toy," Kokabil stated with a smirk. The man's statement did little to affect the devil as he lifted the sword off his shoulder and pointed at the flying fallen angel. "You tried to harm my friends. For that, you will pay with your life." With those words, dozens upon dozens of swords materialized around the devil. A gasp escaped Ria's lips at the sheer amount of weaponry her knight was managing to summon. Even Kokabeel had to raise an eyebrow as the number of sword crossed over into the hundreds. Some of the weapons actually looked dangerous enough to give him a scratch. "'Tis but a scratch," the fallen angel mused to himself before summoning a sword of his own light spear. Since the devil thought he could go head up against him, he would be glad to crush the boy's delusions. Silence. It was usually something the blonde enjoyed considering how hectic his life could be nowadays. The silence he was experiencing now though was not something he would call enjoyable. The awkward, tension-filled silence was slowly grating away at the blonde's nerve and he was sure it was starting to be noticeable. And the thing was, he was the only one providing all of the tension and awkwardness. Ophis didn't look to have a single care in the whole fucking world as she sat calmly on his bed, her eyes closed and her hands folded as she just sat there. Menacingly sitting there, probably plotting his demise or something along those lines. At least, that's what he suspected. He had absolutely no proof on the matter as Ophis hadn't given him any evidence to use against her. All she had done was sit there. Sitting. He never thought he would hate such a simple action but Ophis had managed to make him detest it. He had attempted to busy himself around the house, cleaning up the remnants of Kuroka's mess and tidying things up in general, but nothing had worked. His mind couldn't get away from the fact that sitting in his bedroom was a god who had attempted to kill him and had verbally informed that he was still one of her target. The situation was beginning to make his head hurt which only served to further his agitation. Calm down, Uzumaki. Don't stress yourself OUFUCK. The blonde shouted rather loudly as he mistakenly stepped on a pair of Kuroka's rarely worn underwear. The blonde's footing was taken out from beneath him as his foot slid against the underwear. He was sent tumbling head first to the ground, a string of curses following after him as his body slammed into the ground. He sat there motionless for several seconds, too stunned at what just happened to move, before eventually wiping the embarrassing memory from his mind and climbing to his feet. At least no one saw that. Uzumaki. The blonde literally jumped into the air at the sound of the voice. When he landed, he had a kunai in hand and was prepared to slit the throat of whoever had managed to sneak up on him. When he saw Ophis standing at the entrance of the hallway, his kunai stayed raised as stared at her petite form. "Ah!" was all the blonde could articulate as he stared down at the dragon god. The girl stood with her arms crossed along her chest as she stared at him with a single eyebrow raised. A quick glance down at himself allowed him to identify why he was receiving that look. Kuroka's panties was hanging from his foot. A sheepish look crossed his face before he quickly flicked his foot, sending the pair of underwear across the room and saving the last bits of his already damaged pride. "Is there something you need? Your loudness distracted me from my rest." The girl responded in an even tone. The way she used rest made it seem as if the dragon had been possibly sleeping. Oh god, did she sleep in his bed? Was it weird to have a dragon god sleep in your bed before your girlfriend? The blonde cleared his mind of these thoughts with a quick shake of his head. He couldn't waste too much attention on those questions. Well. The blonde started off before straightening up. The shinobi resealed his kunai as he took on a somewhat sheepish demeanor. "I'm about to leave to go take care of some stuff around town." He paused here, not completely sure on what to say next. The proper thing to say when one had invited guests over was to ask if they needed anything. Unfortunately for him, Ophis was the furthest thing from being an invited guest which put him into a rather awkward situation. Luckily for the blonde, he didn't have to worry much about responding as Ophis acted first. The god confidently strode over towards him, causing him to tense up slightly. Instead of attacking like he assumed she would, the god merely stood by his side while looking up expectantly at him. "Where you go, I go." Exasperation filled the blonde at her simple explanation. She not only broke into his house but now wanted to follow him around town. How crappy could the situation get? "Anyone that annoys me will die." He really needed to stop asking that question. "Come on children. Show me some battle lust. Or do I have to blow up more of your precious school?" Kokabeel cackled as Issei sent himself flying towards the man. The gauntlet wearer looked worse for wear as he approached the fallen angel with his arm outstretched. Etched onto his face was pure murderous intent as he finally got close enough to swipe at the man's throat. Unfortunately for the devil, his attack hit nothing but air as Kokabeel sent himself flying backwards with a single flap of his wings. The air current produced by his wings slammed into Issei, halting all of his forward momentum and sending him tumbling headfirst to the ground. He would have found himself nursing a broken neck if Kaneko hadn't appeared underneath him, catching him from his free fall before unceremoniously dumping him on the ground. Idiot! Stupid move! Don't do it again! The girl reprimanded her fellow devil while keeping her attention focused on the fallen angel. The man looked to be damn near giddy due to his half-hearted attempts to keep a grin off of his face. He had every right to be as happy as he was considering the outcome of the fight so far. Kaneko glanced behind her, her eyes meeting the pain-filled one of her peerage's knight. A bloody red streak ran from shoulder to hip across his body. The wound was a reminder of the devil's encounter with the fallen angel. While Kiba's sword had been numerous and the ferocity of his attack was fueled by his need to protect his friends, the devil came up incredibly short against the much more powerful and experienced fallen angel. The man had evaded every sword that was thrown at him before sending the devil spiraling back towards the ground with a swipe of a hastily made light spear. The devil, even while being enhanced by the powers that laid within his chess piece, wasn't quick enough to react and was now suffering for it. The crack of thunder sent Kaneko back on high alert. The Nekasho glanced up at the sky and saw Kokobile was now drifting back and forth in order to dodge the series of lightning strikes that were raining from the sky. The lightning was colored a dark shade of purple, tipping the girl off to just who exactly was the cause behind the strange weather occurrence. Akino had made her move and was leaving the man distracted. Good. With the fallen angel's attention off of her, she had free rein to prepare an attack. Unfortunately, her long-range move set was slightly lacking in depth. She was a close-range fight, her piece made sure of that. But getting close to Kokobile and not leaving without some type of wound was proving to be difficult. Despite her higher-than-average resistance to light poisoning, she rather not risk getting run through by one of the man's spear, so she did what any logical person would do in her situation. She dashed over to the closest tree and grabbed it tightly with both hands by its trunk. With a small grunt of effort, she ripped it from out the ground, roots and all. She briefly balanced the massive hunk of lumber over her head, making sure to say a brief mental apology to her boyfriend and the earth for what she just did, before taking aim and throwing the tree at the still distracted Kokobile. Satisfaction. That was the only way to describe how she felt as she watched the tree slam into Kokobile, sending him tumbling from the sky. The anxiety and worry that came during the unlikely projectile's flight through the air was completely wiped from her mind as pure joy at watching the man get buried beneath a tree replaced it. In the back of her mind, she knew that getting hit by a tree wasn't enough to do any lasting damage to the fallen angel. Someone who had fought in the Great War wouldn't succumb to something of that nature. She pushed those thoughts aside and decided to focus on the happiness that had filled her from smacking a grown man out the sky with a tree. It was the small victories that mattered anyways. What is this? Ophis questioned as she held onto the cone-shaped objective that had a cold, white milky substance dripping down the sides of it. On top of the cone sat a single scoop of a powdery white substance that the milky lines seemed to be originating from. I told you, it's ice cream. Naruto said before returning to licking his own ice cream cone. Unlike Ophis, his ice cream was actually sherbet, a bright orange sugary substance that always managed to put a smile on his face. Even when he was standing next to a god that wanted to kill him, the two made for a rather interesting duo considering the difference in height and appearance. Naruto was used to the heightened attention due to his time with Kaneko, so the stares went ignored by him. Ophis, on the other hand, didn't share the same sentiment as her blonde companion. The stares annoyed her and set her on edge. It was only by Naruto's pleading and not so subtle threatening that she hadn't attacked anyone as of yet. It's cold. Ophis commented only to be ignored by the blonde as he focused his full attention on devouring his sherbet cone. A spark of annoyance flashed within her at being ignored, but it was quickly squashed. Getting angry with the boy wouldn't benefit her whatsoever. His actions made that abundantly clear. So instead, she decided to focus on the treat that laid melting within her hand. As a primordial being, she didn't require sustenance, but her taste buds were still fully developed and perfectly functional. Her sense of smell was also working and was currently picking up the light scent of vanilla drifting up from her ice cream. Her mouth watered slightly before she tentatively lifted the cone towards her mouth and gave it a cautionary lick. Cold. That was the first word that came to mind as her tongue came within contact of the ice cream. An explosion of flavor followed the cold feeling as the taste of vanilla invaded her mouth. It was sweet but not too sweet. Cold but not too cold. It made mouth water more, and she would be lying if she said she didn't want more. Luckily for her, she had a full cone left to herself that she would use to explore the taste of the ice cream. Naruto had to hold in a chuckle as he watched Ophis from the side of his eye. The dragon god was now eagerly licking away at her ice cream cone, her face morphed into a mask of concentration as she focused her attention on the taste of her treat. He knew ice cream would be able to hold the girl's attention. Minutes before, it looked like the girl was seconds away from decimating an entire city block. Now, the blonde could see the tiny foundations of a smile making its way onto her face. Crisis averted. Naruto gave himself a mental pat on the back for his quick thinking. Sometimes being a badass ninja hero that saved lives was just a bit too easy. An explosion ripped through the sky, shaking the ground in the process and sending the people surrounding the duo in a frenzy. Ophis, not expecting the small tremor, was sent slightly off balance, her grip on her ice cream being momentarily released as she caught her balance. Unfortunately, she was not fast enough to save her treat as the ice cream cone slammed mercilessly to the ground, its contents spilling onto the warm concrete along with the beginnings of any happiness the dragon god had been feeling. Naruto's eyes caught none of this as he focused on trying to find the origin of the explosion. His eyes locked on and narrowed on a floating figure on the opposite side of town. Target found. Ophis. I'll be right ba. Naruto turned to address the dragon but stopped himself when he came upon a horrifying fact. Ophis was no longer standing beside him. A quick sweep of the surrounding area told him that she was now nowhere near him. The infinite dragon god was on the loose in Kuo and he had just let her walk away. Fuck me. Maybe being a badass ninja hero wasn't as easy as it seemed. A tree. A god-forsaken tree. Worst of all, it was thrown by a teenage girl. Oh, how that fact angered him. Kaneko could sense that anger. It was damn near palpable being as close to him as she was. A quick side step allowed her to dodge a forward thrust from the fallen angel's light spear. Attempting to take advantage of the man's overextension, the Nekashu shot off her back foot and sent herself rocketing into the fallen angel's guard. The man had no time to react before Kaneko landed a haymaker punch to his stomach, lifting Kokobile further off the ground and sending him propelling backwards. That was just going to piss him off even more. She knew that, but it had been so satisfying landing a hit on the fallen angel. Her training with Naruto definitely had been paying off as she could actually feel the man's muscles beneath her fist contract as she made contact with it. The light amount of spit and bile that came from his mouth and fell in front of her didn't even bother her much considering she had been the cause of it. With the man slightly separated from the Nekashu, Akino made her move. The girl had been focusing her energy for the past minute while the Nekashu had been engaging the fallen angel. A basketball-sized orb laid between her hands as her eyes stayed trained on the man. As soon as Kaneko landed the hit, the queen knew it was time. She let her attack off, sending the orb of deadly electric careening through the air. The orb crossed the distance separating the devil and the fallen angel in a single second. It looked to be about to slam into the fallen angel, but before it could, Kokobile twisted in midair, backhanding the orb out of the air, sending the attack slamming harmlessly into the ground several feet away. Akino didn't have time to mourn the utter waste of her energy before Kokobile retaliated. With a single flex of the man's wings, hundreds of hardened fingers were sent rocketing towards the girl. The feathers covered an area of over 100 yards long and were approaching quickly, forcing the devil into a hurried backpedal as she attempted to find a way to evade the steel wall of death. Luckily for her, she wouldn't have to think long as a red orb of destruction came flying over her head and slammed into a portion of the wall of feathers, eradicating them from existence. Sensing the opening, Akino unfurled her wings and flew through the hole in the attack, just barely avoiding being skewered by dozens of feather. The moment she landed in the relatively safer position, she wanted to turn and thank her king because she knew it was only because of Rias that she was alive right now. That was not possible, however, as Kokobile was currently in the process of dive-bombing her with a light sword in hand. The girl hurriedly began to build up energy once again in preparation for an impromptu attack as the man quickly closed the distance between the duo. Metal meeting metal was the sound that greeted Akino's ear. The devil allowed the energy that had been building up within her to die away as she stared at the back of her would-be savior. The latex uniform the person was wearing was a dead giveaway to their identity if the giant sword they were wielding wasn't a big enough hint. An exorcist working alongside devils? I didn't think the servants of God would fall so low. Kokobile calmly said as he locked swords with Zenobia. The girl was physically struggling to keep up with the fallen angel's immense strength if the straining of her muscles were anything to go by. Even through the struggle, a snarl worked its way out of her mouth as she pushed against the men's sword. "I am not working with any devils." The girl punctuated the last word by drawing her sword back, ending the power struggle in the hopes that it would send the fallen angel off balance. Unfortunately for the girl, the man had centuries of experience in the art of swordplay that allowed him to predict the girl's simple tactic. So instead of stumbling forward, allowing the exorcist to end the fight by running him through with her sword, Kokabeel jumped backwards while taking a long swipe of his sword. Mid-swing, Kokabeel forced his light energy through the blade of the sword, elongating it by almost double its original length. "Not enough!" the girl yelled while hastily bringing her sword up to block the wave of light energy. Her holy sword absorbed the full brunt of the attack, saving her from being bisected. From behind the blade of her sword, Zenobia let loose a heated glare at the smirking fallen angel. The man wasn't taking her seriously and it agitated her. Suddenly, Kokabeel leaped backwards just moments before a white blur crashed violently into the ground where he was standing. Kaneko stood up from the small crater that she had formed by her dynamic entry, a technique that she had learned from Naruto. Her eyes briefly locked with Zenobia as a silent understanding was shared between the two before they leapt into action. The duo made for a deadly duo with the combination of Kaneko's enhanced strength and Zenovia's swordplay. The combat compatibility was strangely high as the girls flowed almost seamlessly through their attacks. Whenever Kaneko went low to attack, Zenobia was directly behind her, aiming high in the hopes of catching the fallen angel off guard. Whenever Zenobia leapt to confront Kokabeel, Kaneko was directly beneath her, ready to make the fallen angel paid if he slipped up. Unfortunately, not even the impromptu teamwork between the two managed to overcome the fallen angel as he easily handled the two. Each of Kaneko's attacks were redirected or dodged while Zenovia's sword strikes were all parried. Any ground gained by the girls was quickly taken back as Kokabeel happily repelled the devil/exorcist duo. Not even the combined might of a devil and an exorcist can overcome the strength of a fallen angel. "Your kind will both fall to the hands of the Gri." The man would never get to finish his sentence or any other thought for that matter as he was attacked. A snake, as dark as the night, sprang up from beneath the man and silently latched onto his neck. A strangled yelp leapt from the fallen angel's voice as the snake's fangs buried into his neck. Kaneko and Zenobia watched in a mixture of confusion and horror as men's yells grew louder and louder with each second passed. His sickly pale skin began to pulse a deep black as he collapsed down to his knees, his hands clutched uselessly around the body of the snake as he attempted to yank the creature off of him. His efforts were for naught as the snake kept its firm grip on his neck. As the seconds passes, the fallen angel's attempts grew weaker and weaker as the snake seemed to drain him of his energy. It took only 30 seconds of the snake being attached to his throat for Kokabeel to finally stop in his struggling and collapse face first into the dirt, his body a disfigured and dry husk of what it originally was. The snake removed itself from the now corpse with 2 quiet pops before focusing its attention onto the duo of girls. Both exorcist and devil alike tensed up slightly as the black snake looked to be about to attack them. After watching the creature literally suck Kokabeel, an enemy they could barely touch themselves, dry, they didn't want to be anywhere near that thing. Luckily for them, the creature backed off as its owner descended down into the schoolyard. Kaneko and Zenobia both had to hold back a flinch as they met the cold, emotionless eyes of the snake's owner. The eye contact only lasted a mere moment, but the duo got the message it carried loud and clear. They were only alive because she willed it. Ophis' feet lightly touched the ground just as her snake slithered up to her. The god gave the creature a light pat on its head before it crawled up her leg into the confines of her skirt. No one dared to ask how the god managed to store such a large creature beneath her dress in fear of some type of retaliation. Her gaze wandered over Kokabeel, or at least the man's corpse. It only took her a few steps to reach his prone form, each of those steps sending chills down the teen's spines as the god inadvertently got closer to them. Luckily for them, the god had no intention on bothering the duo as she crouched in front of the dead fallen angel. A single touch of her hand. That was all it took before Kokabeel's body began to disintegrate. His skin flaked off of his muscles in airy wisps that looked like the remnants of burnt paper. After the first layer of skin had degraded, the muscles soon followed. Then bone. Then organs, until all that remained was a puddle of blood that was slowly soaking into the surrounding dirt. The process disgusted Kaneko, Zenobia, and the rest of Ria's peerage who had arrived just moments before the process started. The horrified look on their face was clear even when Ophis stood back to her full height and faced them, the same cold and emotionless look still present in her eyes. He made me spill my ice cream. Chapter 21. Cold and unblinking. Those were the two words that accurately described Ophi's expression. The god's face seemed to be set in a permanent mask of neutrality and stiffness as she met eyes with Kaneko. In all honesty, the young Nekasha should have felt some type of fear staring into the face of an all-powerful dragon god. It would have only been natural, after all. Even though her power was masked in the form of a little girl, Kaneko was aware enough to realize that the person, well, God sat in front of her could wipe her off the face of the planet within a blink of an eye. The girl had more power in her pinky than she would ever have in her existence. Yet none of this mattered to the girl. None of this mattered when the god was encroaching on her territory, aka Naruto Uzumaki. The two girls were currently sat inside of the teen's shop at his counter. Kaneko was sat at her usual position behind the counter while Ophis sat at the opposite side, lazily munching away at a tray of snickerdoodles while looking into Kaneko's eyes. Her ears were covered by a pair of overly large and fuzzy earmuffs. The god's gaze contained no malice or ill intent, only containing a sort of emotionless quality that was off-putting to most. To Kaneko though, it was only a sign of challenge. "Can you please stop glaring at her?" Her boyfriend's voice managed to draw the Nekasha's attention away from the god and back onto him. The blonde was caked in a ludicrous amount of sugar and powder as he sent her a pleading look. She shot him an irritated look of her own before sending her fellow loli a sharp side glance. "I'll stop when she leaves," was the girl's simple response before settling her glare back onto Ophis. Seeing that his girlfriend had no plans on stopping anytime soon, Naruto was left to do nothing but sigh and return back to his work. It had only been a couple days since Kokabiel's attack on Kuo, so there was still hope that things would go back to normal. He just had to wait it out a bit. That strategy seemed to always work out for him in the end, right? Shortly after Ophis' rather quick and pathetic murder of Kokabiel, Naruto arrived on campus ground. The scene that greeted him would have been very amusing to him if everyone who was present at the school attention hadn't been switched over to him. Ophis hadn't made things any better in the moment when she decided to casually trudge over to him and stand by his side. Oh, that had gone so wonderfully with his possessive Nekasha girlfriend. He could still feel the heat of her glare on him even to this day. It didn't take much coaxing out of everyone to get the exact details of what exactly had went down. When he had discovered the fallen angel's attack and subsequent death, all he could do was sigh. He felt partly bad that something so huge had went under his nose for so long, but he was glad it was dealt with so quickly. He was confident he would have been able to deal with Kokabiel himself, but having Ophis there definitely made things easier, and a lot quicker. He just hadn't expected the dragon to stay. He was able to sense the girl's reserves had refilled slightly after her encounter with Kokabiel. It wouldn't surprise him that she managed to somehow drain the man's reserves and convert it into her own. Now her energy levels stood at point where his victory against her wasn't guaranteed. Yet, she refused to make a move against him or, at the least, return to her home. Instead, she stuck to his side like a lost puppy. Her excuse was that she was observing him. He didn't exactly know what her definition of observation was, but he had a slight feeling that he would not enjoy it. Now he was left here with two, well, one agitated loli and one apathetic dragon god on his hands. On top of all of that, the shop was extremely busy today and his employee of the month aka Valley was nowhere to be found. The devil tended to disappear and reappear at the worst of times, leaving the blonde in rather crappy situations like the one he was in right now. It's not like he would do anything. He would probably just sulk around and go mop a corner. The blonde thought to himself as he skewered a series of rice dumplings along a stick before handing over to a very enthusiastic child. The young boy quickly a handful of money onto the counter before snatching the dango from the blonde and running out of the shop. The boy didn't even wait to receive his change, something Naruto certainly wasn't going to complain about. "Next customer please." The teen shouted over the multitude of conversations taking place within the building. A small smile worked its way onto his face as a duo, presumably a couple, began to make their way up to the counter. Even with his hectic his life and shop could be a time, he could honestly say he wouldn't have it any other way. Why does everything have to be so difficult, Naya? From a very young age, Kuroka realized that everything wasn't as easy as it seemed. Sometimes the cards were just stacked against certain people. She was one of those people. She didn't know why, but whenever God had created her had decided to make life just a tiny bit more difficult for her. The day Naruto had released her, she had actually returned to the blonde's house later that day with full intentions on talking the blonde into letting her stay. She had went out and bought some ramen just in case her words didn't manage to woo the blonde over. If she couldn't reach him, she knew that ramen could, but when she arrived at the house, no one was there. She had assumed that the blonde had gone out to his shop. That assumption came to a quick close when she felt a sudden spike of energy before the ground began to shake violently. Her senses immediately picked up the massive taint of fallen angel energy coming from the direction of her sister's school and took off towards it with full intentions on stopping any attacker who would dare attempt to harm her sister, even if that meant revealing her presence to the girl. When she arrived at the school, it didn't take her long to realize that her intervention was unneeded, considering her somewhat former employer was standing over the decaying corpse of Kokabeel, one of the Bible's more prominent fallen angel. The god looked bored as the fallen angel's body flaked and faded into dust and vapor into thin air. The girl didn't look the slightest perturbed by the sight as she focused her attention onto the surrounding devils, which included Kuroka's little sister. The head act set the older Nekasho on edge as she had mentally prepared herself to leap out from her cover and face down the dragon. Fortunately for her, the situation didn't come to that as her housemate quickly arrived on scene and defused the situation. That had been several days ago, and ever since then Kaneko had been stuck to Naruto's side. The young girl refused to leave his side, partly in a sign of her own affection and partly because of Ophi's presence. Kuroka knew that her younger sister saw the god as somewhat of a love rival, even though Ophis had never shown any sign of affection towards Naruto. The girl had shown quite the opposite, considering the fact she had attempted to abduct and kill Naruto. Yet, that fact did not matter to the territorial Nekasho girl. In Kaneko's eyes, Ophis was not the infinite dragon god of legends that wouldn't hesitate to kill anything that so much as annoyed her. Instead, Ophis was a fellow predator encroaching on territory that she had already marked for herself. Kuroka couldn't help but shake her head at the line of thought she knew her sister was having. With any other given person, the older sister would have been more supportive of her sister's attitude towards her mate. But when it came to Ophis, the god wasn't just another random person. She was dangerous. If the young Nekasho did something to annoy the god, Kuroka couldn't be sure that even Naruto could stop Ophis from completely annihilating the girl. All of this was serving as a mere second thought to the Nekasho as her longing stare stayed focused on Naruto's shop. She wanted nothing more than to run headlong into the building, beg for forgiveness from her little sister, and be one big happy trio with the girl and the blonde. Earlier that week she had been fully prepared to, but the confidence she had felt in the heat of the situation had been quickly doused. Now the same fear that had originally made her hide herself from her sister had come back to haunt her. "Naya, this is so unfair. You shouldn't make so much noise if you're trying to stay hidden." The Nekasho almost jumped out of her skin at the sudden voice behind her. Not many people could manage to sneak up on her, so the fact that someone had managed it was slightly surprising. "Valakuen." It's been a while. Naya. Kuroka's cheerful behavior returned to her tenfold as she looked upon her colleague/boss. The teen looked the exact same as when she had originally saw him. Everything from his constipated-looking scowl down to the straight-from-Hot Topic silver chain hanging from his belt loop. The devil seemed to almost sense her line of thought as his scowl seemed to deepen as he crossed his arms over his chest. "I can say the same for you. What happened to your weekly reports?" he questioned while attempting to glare at the girl. His glare failed fantastically as Kuroka shrugged it off with a light laugh before she began to stretch in a cat-like manner. "I've been a bit held up lately," she responded as she finished her stretching. The devil rolled his eyes at the girl's rather vague excuse. He knew he wouldn't be getting any more information from the Nekasho. If there was something she didn't want revealed, she would make sure that the information didn't get revealed. Even if that meant giving her boss an annoyingly vague answer. So instead he focused his attention on the interior of his boss' shop. More importantly, he focused on the supernatural being sat at the shop's counter, casually munching away at a plate of sweets. From his view, it was hard to imagine the young girl as one of the most powerful entities in existence, yet Valley wasn't so easily fueled by the innocent facade. That was one of the reasons. After all, he was out here instead of inside. "So how's the new job, Janitor-san? I see you finally managed to get a day off from all the hard work." Kuroka's sardonic comment snapped the devil's attention back onto her. A sly smirk had made its way onto her face as Valley turned to face her, his scowl now turned into a full-blown glower. "How did you hear about that?" The boy's voice was deadly as he attempted to glare a hole through the Nekasho's head. Once again, his intimidation attempts fell short as Kuroka merely waved them away with a light chuckle. "Not telling. Trade secret, Naya." Valley was left with no option but to release his anger in a huff, knowing that pushing the issue would only result in more anger on his part. That was how Kuroka operated, and willingly pushing himself deeper into her trap would be foolish. The two descended into a somewhat comfortable silence as they both returned their attention back onto Naruto's shop. Kuroka's gaze immediately migrated over towards her sister and Naruto, while Valley's remained solely focused on Office. A wind blew softly across the rooftop the duo were occupying, slightly lifting Kuroka's loose kimono while making Valley's hair ruffle slightly. From an outside perspective, the scene looked almost picturesque as the devils seemed to bask in the shared silence. "So how in the hell are you going to deal with that mess?" Kuroka broke the silence as she gestured down towards the shop. Valley sighed in response, not because of the Nekasha's rather blunt way of speaking but because of the meaning behind her words. Unlike everyone else in the Cow's Brigade, Valley wasn't using Office in the hopes of gaining something in return from the dragon. Well, that was somewhat false. He hoped to one day do battle and slay the Great Red, but he didn't expect anything from the god. He saw her as a somewhat objective and primordial force that didn't need to be bothered. He saw the Great Red as a force of chaos that was attempting to push that force over the edge. He also saw certain members of the Cow's Brigade, Chow Chow and his lackeys, in the same light. He hated to admit, but he had taken on the role as a protective force in the god's life against those forces. As long as Office remained in the dimensional gap, his job was pretty easy, as he was pretty sure she was immortal in her home territory. His only concern at that point would have been dealing with the Great Red. Unfortunately, when it came to Office, things weren't that simple. He had been sent into a frenzy when he discovered that she had left the gap. That frenzy had only been somewhat calmed when he discovered through one of his subordinates that the dragon had been following his idiotic blonde boss around. Office was safe near Naruto. Valley may have had a low standard of thinking when it came to male, but he would never underestimate the strength that the blonde held. Chow Chow would surely attempt something, but he would quickly come to the same conclusion. No, his concern with Office following Naruto wasn't her protection but with her mentality. There was something about the shop owner that Valley had discovered from his time around him. The teen seemed to have an almost surreal effect on people when he came in contact with him. The longer the contact, the more intense the effect. Even he could admit that he had fallen victim to Naruto's spell. The anger and intensity that had constantly burned within him seemed to have faded in strength from the constant buffeting by TJ, leaving him feeling somewhat hollow in comparison. It was a strange sensation for the usually passionate devil, and he honestly couldn't imagine how someone of Office nature would deal with it. A sigh slipped through his lips. There was nothing he could do about it now. Separating the god from the blonde would be damn near impossible considering their shared stubbornness. He was better off with just sitting back and allowing things to play out. "Hey, can I crash at your place for a while, Naya? I promise I don't snore much." On second thought, maybe it would be less trouble to just storm down there right now and take care of the situation himself. At least he wouldn't have to deal with an annoying Nekasha if he did. It was an average day for Naruto Uzumaki. Well, as average as one of his days could get nowadays. With having a solemn dragon god constantly by his side and a hawkish cat devil girlfriend following his every move, his definition of normal was a bit twisted. This didn't matter much to the shinobi as he basked in the early morning glow of the sun from the inside of his shop. "It's days like these where I really appreciate opening this shop," the blonde seemingly said to no one, since not a single person was in his vicinity to actually listen. Office had her headphones on and looked to be meditating while Kaneko was actually asleep in the back room of the shop, Naruto having carried her there earlier that morning. The few customers who were actually present in the store were busy enjoying their morning coffee before they headed off to work. And Valley was nowhere to be found as usual. "I see you're growing senile in your old age." And there was the cynical voice of his partner to put an end to his overly happy mood. Kurama never seemed to fail when it came to that aspect of their relationship. "I see that time can't even make you less of an asshole." The blonde shot back as he leaned his elbows against the counter. It was early in the morning and most of his customers tended to order simple coffee or small treats around this time. He didn't have to worry about preparing anything at the moment, allowing him to devote his full attention to trading barbs with Kurama. "An asshole, I may be, but at least I'm not idiotic enough to attract the attention of every single supernatural creature in a 10-mile radius of us just by being yourself." Naruto gave a slight wince at that one. That one hit a bit too close to home considering one of those supernatural creatures, a god for that matter, was sitting in his shop right now with unknown intentions. It's not my fault. I didn't even do anything to them. Naruto mentally exclaimed, his face taking on a childish pout. A small silence followed his words, during which he could almost feel the kitsunes rolling his eyes at his behavior. That makes it even worse. Your mere existence attracts trouble, Kurama said, beating Naruto down once more with his words. The teen gave a sharp huff as he stopped leaning against the counter. At least I don't have bunny ears. The blonde knew what he was getting himself into when he said that comment. If there was one thing that Kurama was conscious about, it was his appearance. The beast's slightly oversized ears were a point of teasing for him as a child by his siblings, and Naruto knew he was walking out into dangerous territory by bringing it up. It was too late to turn back now. What did you just say to me? The tailed beast's tone had dropped slightly as a small indication of just exactly how he felt. Naruto hesitated only slightly before pressing forward. You heard me, you overgrown human rabbit. He had sealed his fate, so he might as well go all in. You dare to speak to me like that, you idiotic, frog-licking, tree-humping, sorry excuse for a sage. Kurama fired back with just as much bite, bringing up topics he knew would anger the blonde. And anger him it did as Naruto's face took on a mask of fury. I'm a very good sage, you mutated bunny rabbit. And they are toads, not frogs. Frogs, toads, it doesn't matter. What you call them doesn't change the fact that they are as useless as the bugs they made you eat. Kurama had struck low with that one, and he knew it. The blonde immediately swelled in his anger as his face turned a noticeably brighter shade of red. You listen here, you bit. The blonde was just in the genesis of his insulting tirade when he noticed that he had started talking out loud, and he had a duo of new guests standing at his counter. He immediately straightened up and wiped the angered look off his face while mentally urging his partner that their argument would be continued later. Hey what can I get for you two? Naruto casually addressed the duo standing in front of him as if they were any other customer. Which they weren't, considering one was a perverted harem-driven devil and the other was an excommunicated priestess-turned-devil. The two devils stood nervously in front of the shinobi, both a bundle of nerves as they faced their blonde savior. Issei was having a hard time remaining still while Asia couldn't even look at the teen. Issei mumbled as he tried his hardest to make eye contact with Naruto. A few weeks ago, he had only known the blonde as being simple candy store owner. But now he knew the blonde was possibly a nature god that also ran a candy shop on the side. Fortunately for Issei, he wouldn't need to speak up as Asia did it for him. The woman all but threw herself at the counter of the shop as a resolute expression found its way onto her face. Naruto-san. Please teach me how to bake so I can make Akino-san a cake to cheer her up. Asia exclaimed with closed eyes and her hands thrusted forward. Her yell managed to catch the attention of everyone in the shop, including Ophis, as the god glanced over to the person who had disturbed her meditation. Naruto silently stared at the girl for several seconds, making the priestess fear the worse. She knew that she was taking a huge risk coming to the shop. Issei had made it clear that the owner of the shop has been a strange man and his help wasn't 100% guaranteed. Her somewhat demanding tone probably didn't help much either. Why is Akino sad? Asia's eyes shot back open at the unexpected question. Her head tilted up slightly to meet Naruto's cerulean eyes with her own. Well, I'm not too sure. Ever since the battle with the fallen angel, she hasn't been herself. She barely even talks to any of us, including Ria-sama. The girl's tone started off hesitant but quickly picked up in confidence as she spoke. Issei stood to the side as a silent bystander in complete awe and slight pride as he watched his fellow devil be so confident. Asia had never been confident when it came to expressing herself, especially when it came to strangers. She makes us snacks and treats all the time. The girl's self-assured tone began to taper off as she broke eye contact with Naruto. A sudden interest in the floor tiles came over her as she stared at the ground. I thought if I surprised her with a cake of my own, I could cheer her up. The devil finished off her speech in a barely audible mumble, her confidence having completely faded away. Naruto released a thoughtful hum once Asia finished before descending back into a thoughtful silence. We all know you're going to help her out, so just say yes. Kurama chimed in. How do you know I'll say yes? Because you're you, idiot. The insult wasn't necessary but point received. Naruto cut off his mental connection with the beast to spare himself any more insults. He then refocused his attention back onto Asia, who looked like she was seconds away from running out the shop. The sad and defeated look on the girl's face pulled on Naruto's heart as he subconsciously and begrudgingly realized just how right Kurama was. I think what you're trying to do for your friend is really sweet. Asia's heart fell at what she thought was the dismissive tone in the blonde's voice. She quickly realized how mistaken she was as she felt a hand land on top of her scalp. She slowly lifted her head to look at the now smiling face of Naruto Uzumaki. So I would love to help you make a cake. Let me get you an apron and let's start baking. The girl's face lit up in a brilliant smile that almost seemed to light up the room. Naruto, himself, couldn't help the slight surge of happiness that shot through him at the sight of her face. You're such a sentimental bastard. Shut up and let me enjoy this moment. Barakiel. The name disgusted her even when it was just in her thoughts. The man, her father, was the bane of her existence. And the battle with Kokobile dragged up every single negative memory connected to him. She was his daughter and she would never be able to get away from that. His dirty blood flowed through her and she couldn't change that. His powers constantly tried to wrestle control over her. The cause of her mother's death gave her life and she hated every second of her existence because of it. Those were just some of the few thoughts running through Akino's head as she attempted to busy herself with cleaning the clubroom. The room was damn near spotless, considering the fact she had secluded herself to the room for the past hour, yet the girl continued to work. Any inconspicuous speck of dust or dirt was claimed victim by the devil in a desperate attempt to block out her melancholy thoughts. The girl was a flurry of fabric and hair as she flew around the room like a twister. Akino-san. A soft voice managed to pause the queen in her movement. The girl knew who the voice belonged to. There was only one person who had access to this room and could manage to sound so sweet and innocent. Akino managed to hold in a sigh as she turned to face Asia. To her surprise, the girl wasn't empty-handed. Clutched to her chest was a round plastic container. And contained within that container was a cake. I just wanted to give this to you. Asia stuttered out while holding out the cake towards the queen. With the pastry now closer, Akino was able to get a better look at it. The thing was obviously not professionally made. The haphazard distribution of icing and the misshapen sides made that very clear to the devil. The thing that gave away the fact that the dish was homemade was the handwriting on top of the cake that spelt out her name. What is this for? Akino questioned, genuinely unsure of the cake's purpose. Her and Asia were good friends, of course, but nothing had occurred between them recently to justify something like this. Asia seemed to pick up on this as her fell slightly for a few seconds before she met eyes again with Akino. You just seemed so sad lately, so I thought I could help cheer you up. The girl mumbled out while retracting her arms, her shyness coming into light once again. Akino blinked owlishly once before her patented giggle slipped past her lips. Asia was taken by surprise as this was the first time she had heard Akino laugh in a whole week. I'm sorry for my rudeness. Akino started off with a few more giggles escaping from her lips. But I cannot accept this cake from you. It was Asia's turn to be shocked at the girl's response. Even though she had shyly approached the situation, she hasn't expected to be rebuked so easily by Akino. The lax tone it was said in definitely didn't help the situation. But. The young blonde was put to a quick stop when Akino raised her hand. Asia was left entirely speechless as the girl began to talk again. You don't understand. I cannot and will not accept this from you. I am not deserving of it. Someone as dirty as me does not deserve this. She explained with a sense of finality to her voice. The solemn tone carried in her words did little to help improve the blonde's mood. Asia looked as if she wanted to refute the girl's claim, but whatever confidence that had built up within her quickly died away when she got a glance of Akino's face. Her expression almost dared the younger girl to respond just so she could cut it down with ruthless efficacy. So it was with those parting words that Asia admitted defeated. The young girl clutched the cake back to her body, turned away and walked to the clubroom's exit. Akino watched with mixed emotions as her fellow devil trudged through and out the room's exit, leaving her alone once again. Well, that didn't go well. Naruto said out loud from his position on top of one of the many trees bordering Kuo Academy. His eyes were locked onto the quickly retreating form of Asia as the young girl made a mad dash away from the clubroom. Even from his position across campus, he could hear the girl's somewhat muted sniffles. The cake clutched to her chest was a clear sign of just how well her mission had went. Do you plan on intervening again? Kurama questioned from within his mindscape. Naruto released a thoughtful hum at the question as his eyes tracked Asia until she ran into the Issei's awaiting arms. I don't think so, at least for now. Sometimes friends just need to work things out amongst themselves. You mean like you and Sasuke? Excluding the Chidori and Rasengan, then yes. When they manage to get through this, their friendship will be much stronger. That won't happen if I walk them through everything. The blonde finished as he watched the two devils begin to walk away, arm in arm with one another. Asia seemed to have calmed considerably due to Issei but was still visibly shaken up. He was sure the girl's mood would improve even more with Issei near her. For your general level of intelligence, that was actually somewhat profound. I don't like all your complaining recently. At least I don't rap every sentence like B. I can't even imagine how quickly I would have attempted to tear through the seal despite the consequences with that man as my host. Wouldn't doing that kill you? Death would be much kinder to me than that man's constant babbling. Naruto couldn't help but chuckle at his partner's attitude. After all, he couldn't be sure if he would be able to last trapped inside his fellow Jinchuriki's gut. Uzumaki. Naruto could proudly say that he didn't jump out his skin when Ophis said his name. Instead, he calmly turned to face the god who was calmly leaned against the main trunk of the tree. I wish to leave. These insects refuse to stop pestering me. Naruto could barely hold in a chuckle as he watched the girl's composure break slightly through her attempting to swat away a fly. The laugh was quickly suppressed when his mind caught up to the fact that the young girl was still a dragon god that supposedly wanted to kill him. Yeah, we can go now. I don't think him needed anymore. Plus Kaneko is probably awake by now. The blonde said before promptly jumping from the tree. Ophis was not far behind him as the duo quickly began to make their way back into town. I hate that child. Barakiel couldn't help but mutter as he wiped some sand from behind his ear. Even though it had been weeks since his altercation with Naruto, he was still finding sand in places he'd rather not find sand in. It served as an irritating and constant reminder of what had occurred. Stop whispering to yourself. It makes you seem more senile than you actually are. Barakiel glanced over to his less agitating partner and person who had shared in his fate. Unlike him, Shemhazai had been taken to a much colder place, a tundra to be more exact. The blonde had buried his fellow fallen angel in yards of ice and snow before disappearing. When the duo had finally managed to regroup, the man was still experiencing signs of hypothermia. That had been weeks ago. When Azazel had discovered what happened, the man wouldn't stop laughing for a full hour. It had taken Shemhazai physically threatening him to shut him up. Him and Shemhazai had debated going after the blonde again but quickly discovered no merit to the idea after an analysis of their rather quick defeat. It hadn't taken a single minute for the team to incapacitate both men, and that had been with a single move. Another encounter would be near suicidal. You're the older one, so technically speaking you would be the more senile one. Barakiel coolly responded as he continued to pore over his set of reports. Ever since all but banning Azazel from a majority of his job, the fallen angel duo had been forced to take up his work. This meant doing all of the men's paperwork. I didn't realize the idiot had so much paperwork. Shemhazai said as he pushed aside his second stack of papers for the day. Barakiel grunted in response, agreeing with his partner but not having the energy nor motivation to give a verbal response. Speaking of Azazel, where the hell is that idiot? He should be the one. Shemhazai was quickly silenced when the door to their shared office burst open. In came walking the exact same idiot the fallen angel had just been talking about. Hey guys! Guess what? I brought a friend. The man loudly exclaimed before stepping aside, allowing full of the doorway. Shemhazai actually used the Lord's name when he saw who was standing in the doorway. Barakiel actually shot up from his seat when he saw their guest. Hello brothers. Nice to see you both again. That's it for part 5. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.